Hello everybody and welcome back to RPG Horror Stories. I'm Firestar and I'll be your host. Today we have some out-of-game problems that turn into in-game ones. Let's get into it. Our first horror story is titled, DM banned me from playing as a cleric because I'm not religious IRL. Posted by u/globalsnow8996. Title says it all, but to be more detailed, Baldur's Gate 3 has piqued my interest in Dungeons & Dragons. I've always been a casual fan, but never really had the energy to learn and play. But after playing through the game, I am convinced. My friend is a seasoned player and has a group of friends that have run a campaign for 6 to 7 years and invited me to join to try it out as a guest character. I was stoked to play and rolled up a cleric, my favorite class to play in Baldur's Gate 3. I learned the rules as best as I could, and made a short backstory for my character with a quirk that she's always saying prayers, thanking her goddess, and has rituals that she follows daily. Cliché cleric stuff that I thought. That was until the DM asked me if I was religious IRL. I said no and thought that it was a weird question, and the DM then says I was appropriating religious culture and that I couldn't be authentic to my character because I don't believe in any real-life religion. I argued that this is a fantasy role-playing game and I can play whatever I want to play within reason. He accused me of being toxic and banned me from playing cleric and made me roll up a human fighter, far from what I actually wanted to play because it was easier for a first-time player. Is this normal behavior for DMs? I wasn't trying to appropriate a specific religion, just what I had seen and absorbed from Baldur's Gate. I was super stoked to play for the first time, but this left a really sour taste in my mouth. My friend just shrugged it off and said it was the DM style. Did people take role-playing that seriously? Should I stay away from cleric for that reason? Edit 1. Loud and clear. This was not normal. I won't be returning to the table. I've seen some folks saying that he was justified if I was intentionally being offensive, which was never my goal. Or that there might have been some religious people at the table that would have found it offensive. I genuinely wanted to just play my Tav from Baldur's Gate in a D&D setting, and I always choose the cleric blah 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 option in conversations in-game, and just wanted to roleplay that in person at a table. Also, I 100% get that playing as a fighter probably would have been easier for me to play for the first time, but I was told that if I understand Baldur's Gate spellcasting, it's also fairly similar to how I should play it at the table. I legitimately have no idea if I was set up for failure from the get-go. Yeah, that is very strange behavior from the DM, and not a good call in my opinion. I don't think that you should be locked out of playing any sort of class or race combo that you want just because you don't fit a certain criteria IRL. I mean, if we all had to fit certain criterias to play certain classes, I don't think any of us would really be playing Dungeons & Dragons. Aside from just that though, it feels a little bit targeted, as if they invited you and maybe wanted to push you into a certain class so that way it could fill out the team better, perhaps. Or it might have been done because they didn't want to deal with teaching new players, and since fighters are notoriously one of the easier classes in Dungeons & Dragons, they wanted to give the absolute easiest so they didn't have to take much time out of their day to teach you how things like spellcasting or things like that worked, in case you had questions, because God forbid it takes out of the game time. When personally I think that teaching new players is part of the fun of D&D, and I understand that if you do it very often it can get a little annoying, especially if you're playing with longtime players and you have a campaign and you want to keep going with it, but in that case just don't invite a new player. Seems a little simple to me, but you know. Our second horror story is titled, Player Quit After I Refused to Let Him Play with a Character He Rolled with Cheat Dice. Posted by u/Arcanus Ultra. Several years back, I took over a game from a friend of mine. He was extremely casual about everything and let the players get away with a lot. I suspected that something was up when a player came to me and said, "Hey, look at this character that I rolled," and the stats were 18, 18, 18, 16, 15, and 14. He got offended when I expressed disbelief that he legitimately rolled that. Also, the old DM had apparently just let them roll and witness for each other. Now, I suspected that the d6s being used were cheat dice, since they came up with a ridiculous amount of 6s in-game. People wanted to roll with them, saying that they were lucky dice. All the players would use them, but the DM had a separate set. Now, I took over DMing, and they continued the characters and campaign they had, but when it came time to start a new one, I expressed my dislike for stat rolling systems, and said that after 9 years of DMing I had decided to stick to point-buy systems only. I had many reasons for this, but the main one was fairness. I didn't like one person having a better character than another based on something as fickle as luck. As bummed as a few were, they all did agree, especially since I'd be allowing them the most points allowed. Then, the wolf, as I'll call him, he was at the table with my other friend, who I'll call Samurai. He had just rolled the dice and was exclaiming, "Yes, finally an 18!" while the samurai watched. He wrote on his paper and had 2 sets of stats written down. They looked like this: 18, 16, 16, 7, 7, 7, 18, 17, 17, 14, 13, 12. I looked at the first one and said, "You dumped it all into 3. Are you playing a fighter type?" He said, "Oh, I'm not using that." And then I asked, "How do you want to spend it? I'll help you." And he said, "No, I rolled my character. Here it is," pointing at the second set. The samurai watched me. This was after I had said that I wouldn't be allowing rolled characters, and everyone, including him, had agreed. I said, "I told you that we're doing point buy." He responded with, "I don't care, it's not enough. This is the character I rolled, the samurai watched me, and this is what I'll be using." I tell him that you can't play with that, and he says, "Either you let me play with this, or I won't play." So he didn't play in that campaign. While the wolf refused to play under me after that, we eventually did play together, but under the samurai in a homebrew Star Wars game that was really a hell of a lot of fun. When I started DMing early on, 3.5 was my first experience, and I gave the characters all kinds of stuff. Monster races, high stats, magic items galore. It was fun, temporarily, like playing a game with cheat codes. When I decided to run a more balanced style, weaning them off of it was hard. Oh, and it was confirmed to me in the end that yes, they were cheat dice. How telling it is that we learn that the cheat dice that are expected to be cheat dice are in fact cheat dice. From my own perspective, I have had a lot of fun playing in campaigns where I've rolled stats before and rolled terribly. One of my last characters was a character who literally had, I think, a 5 intelligence, so about a -3 modifier, but was an extremely charismatic and fun-to-play warlock. It was a lot of fun purely because of the group that I was playing with and the campaign, and the DM allowed us to do lots of shenanigans. But it was a lot of fun just in the sense of getting to play a character that wasn't what I normally played, which I usually tend to play characters closer to myself and how I act just because I find it easier, and because I end up defaulting to that even if I make a character who's different from me. But with such a low intelligence, it was fun to just act insane, and I did blame it on insanity based on a whole backstory. But always wanting the best stats and trying to be the best, like, min-maxed character possible, it kind of takes the fun out of the randomness of Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop games in general. Everyone enjoys it in different ways, so I can't target anyone for wanting to have really good stats all across the board, but cheating to get them is not great. And the fact that he didn't even want to play after he got called out for cheating is quite telling of who he is. And for anyone who might not play Dungeons & Dragons much, the standard array, or the average set of numbers that most new players will end up using to create characters in their stats, are 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. So all of the rolls that this player was getting were wildly above average, and very, very close to being at their maximum, which is a 20. So, with just a few level ups, he could potentially have had at least 2 different stats at 20 by level 8, which is just insane. Now, our third story is going to be our last, because it is quite the long one. This one is titled The Tale of Skeptic, who demanded a fantasy game to get rid of every fantasy element. Posted by u/embarrassedagent40. This is my first horror story, and I hope that it entertains you and that I wrote it in the proper way. TLDR at the end. Trigger warning for mentions of ableism and religious intolerance. First of all the players involved are on the spectrum, and we play in a room provided to us by an association entirely dedicated to autism. Bloody sweet, right? We can play in an environment where our needs will be met, right? Wrong. Basically, the association wanted to be inclusive at all costs, to welcome everybody. And this would ring some alarm bells to any reader who knows about the Popper paradox. The rules were simple. If someone wants to participate in an activity, they are in. No questions asked, no checking if they would actually be a good fit for the activity or the other people involved. 2. No matter how bad someone behaves, they can never, and I mean never, be actively forced to leave or reprimanded in any way, shape, or form. At most, if enough people complain to the board of directors of the association and the board feels like it, they might take a vote to see if it's the case to do something, and in case of an affirmative decision, they could, when they feel like it, contact the problematic member or their legal guardians to politely ask if they're sure they want to continue taking part in the activity. All of this means that a member could have a particularly severe form of autism that makes them snap at basically everything, even in a violent manner, or be a downright asshole who genuinely enjoyed being disruptive and ruining the activity for everybody else. Flash news, even neurodivergent people can be douchebags, and said everybody else should just accept them and make them feel welcome, otherwise we're just excluding someone for being different. And that takes us to Skeptic, a guy, maybe 20-ish years old, whose entire personality boiled down to bragging about how he didn't believe in magic or religion and how smart and rational that made him. Basically, he got dumped on our group by the board of directors because his mother wanted him to socialize, and the normal games lab of the association was not complex and smart enough for him. Unfortunately for all parties involved, we were, at the time, playing an urban fantasy campaign. Heavily fantasy, I would like to add. Every single player had some sort of arcane ability due to both mechanics and setting. So, here's the cast. Me, the GM, doing his best. Bastion, our long-distance fighter, also a marksman, hunter, and expert of gorilla and were-dire hyena. Bisanzio, our berserker, deals the pain and can stand just as much. Shy, silent guy, slowly opening up, shape-shifting, fire-bending vampire with a knack for building and using the big guns. Guild, our longest-running GM, who puts heavy effort into his roleplay, playing a skilled and elegant fencer. Skeptic, the problem player, basically playing himself. Oh, the pain. A thing to add. Due to the setting, Bastion, Bisanzio, Shy, and Guild all come from different time periods. Bastion, Bisanzio, and Guild because they're historical characters summoned to the present, Shy because, being a vampire, he is old as shit. Anyhow, we get introduced to Skeptic, and he immediately takes offense at Bastion wearing a crucifix, and starts talking about how believing in God is irrational and Bastion should wake up. Now, both I, Bisanzio, Shy, and Guild are atheists, but insulting the faith of a guy you just met, and who did nothing to provoke you except for existing, is a big no-no, and the first red flag. However, his mother smiled, and told us that a smart guy like her son had the right to voice his opinion. Although she did apologize, he didn't. If he sounded rude, he did. So, when she left, he started asking what we were playing, and we described the setting, the mechanics, and the characters. He immediately frowned and told us that if we wanted him to play with us, we had to change the game and play something, you guessed it, realistic. I put my foot down, without being rude, because I didn't want to cause him a meltdown. Without raising my voice, I firmly explained to him that we didn't have any game with purely realistic elements, and that he couldn't just barge into other people's games and demand to be allowed to play, and for everybody to play what he wanted. He did not like this, at all. He got out of our room and returned with his mother in tow, trying to pressure, force, guilt-trip us into giving in to his demands. The main argument was that we couldn't force him to play a game that he didn't like, and when we retorted that neither could he, she changed tactics, telling us that it wasn't fair that we wouldn't let him play with us. Guild pointed out that we were already playing when he arrived, he was just completely inept, and his first interaction with us was insulting one of us for being different, and that even if none of that was the case, you can't just pop in a poker game and demand everyone start playing blackjack because that's your favorite game. They left for a few minutes and then returned, both smiling. At the time, I thought they were trying to save appearance, but I know now that they were unable to hide their smug satisfaction at the plan they had concocted. So yeah, Skeptic decided to play the game, and I, optimistic to the point of naivete, or rather downright idiocy, forwarded him the document with the setting rules and the campaign synopsis so that he could enter next time. Next session comes around, and he brags about having read none of what I sent, because he already knew what character he wanted to play, and he fully expected me to rebuild the setting and campaign to accommodate him. Second red flag. I told him that it was simply not going to happen, because that would mean forcing everyone else to change their characters and making us restart the campaign to fit him and him alone in. So Skeptic, I shit you not, opened his bag to take out the official document with his IQ test results. Really, who the literal crap takes that everywhere they go, waiting for a chance to whip it out and brag about it? Also, it was above average, sure, but not by that much. He was like 118 or something. He started telling us how, being that he was clearly the smartest and most rational person in the room, none of us had shown him our IQ test because we have a personality other than being condescending smartasses, so how could we have known? He knew the right thing to do. Bastion muttered that Skeptic was completely free to go and be superior somewhere else, while Guild decided to be snarkier. Guild, say, Skeptic, what do you think of the late Stephen Hawking? Skeptic, are you kidding? He was the smartest man ever. Guild, so you agreed that he was always right, right? Skeptic, of course, he was a genius and didn't believe in made-up gods or anything. Guild gave him a smile worthy of Willem Dafoe on crystal meth and showed Skeptic the famous interview in which Hawking declared that people who boast about their IQ are losers. In poor taste? Yes. Aggressive? Undoubtedly. Undeserved? Oh hell no. Long story short, I saw Skeptic deflate while positively seething not with rage, but pure, distilled, unadulterated hatred for all of us. If he got angry, he would have appeared irrational and unsmart in his mind. If he admitted his wrongness, he would have had to concede to the inferiors, aka us. If he tried to be right, he would have had to contradict Stephen Hawking, aka admitting that being a genius doesn't mean that everybody has to agree with you. He knew that Guild outsmarted him, and he couldn't accept it, because his entire personality was always being the smartest in the room. I managed to defuse the situation, and we tried helping him create a character. It was a shitfest. For starters, he dumped literally all of his points into, of course, being smart and having scientific equipment, which didn't really fit the campaign, but since we had to let him play due to the aforementioned rules, we allowed him to do it. Maybe seeing everyone else having fun would help him understand that he can enjoy make-believe, and that doesn't make him irrational or any less smart. He also created his character as a guy who did not believe in magic whatsoever. I want to be honest, I decided to ignore the red flags, not only because we had no other choice, but also because, honestly, this character could work. Since in this world, despite magic existing, it was just now becoming common knowledge, up until a few in-game months before starting campaign, something akin to the masquerade was firmly in place. And he might have been someone who just entered the supernatural world and therefore started with the assumption that magic was not real. Hell, it could have been the tried and true trope of the scientist who insists on calling magic unconventional science that has yet to be explained or something. Of course, I was wrong. His entire character was soon revealed to be his plan all along, to play with us and use his character as an excuse to actively ruin our fun. The first incident occurred when Bastion's character decided to fire his musket, and Skeptic started laughing in his face. Skeptic, why do you use that weapon? Shouldn't you acquire something modern? Me, see Skeptic, due to how this world works, his musket is actually imbued with his fame and legend as an unbeatable hunter and marksman. Not only is it more precise and deadly than a real musket, it could potentially be more devastating than a heavy ordnance rail cannon. Skeptic, no, it isn't. We then explained to him the gimmick of the character, being an ancient hero summoned from the abyss of history itself, and Skeptic, of course, decided that none of that was canon. This became his MO. Whenever anything clearly supernatural happened or was mentioned, he would grind the game to a halt and demand it to make sense to him, and then decide that since it was something he didn't believe in IRL, it didn't actually happen. The worst instance was when we got slowed down so much that it took 3 4-hour sessions to complete an objective that I designed to be completed in less than 1 session. But wait! It gets worse. Since everything magic was not real, Skeptic refused to help the party in any way, shape, or form, because the horde of flesh-eating, miasma-oozing skeletons they were facing, or the threat of the ancient Atlantis superweapon that was about to turn Hikato into a smoldering ember, was clearly not really there. After some time, I decided to spice things up a bit for the actual players, and asked them to come up with a personal goal to give the campaign more stakes. For the most part, it was nice, and the players actually came up with creative ideas. Bastion's hunter wanted to literally die gloriously in a fight with the biggest, nastiest magical monster ever, killing the beast at the cost of his own life, because he felt that being a hunter was what defined him. Bastion himself revealed to me that his plan was for the hunter to eventually get out of that mindset due to the bonds formed with the party. Bisanzio wanted to become king of Italy to make the country a better place. The game took place in the present, so Italy wasn't even a monarchy to begin with, but he liked the challenge. Shy truly opened up and wanted to help the other vampires of his particular kind to a better place, Exodus style. Guild went full revolution and decided that he would try to end modern legalized slavery by force, if necessary. And then there was Skeptic. His stated goal was to prove that magic didn't exist. The cogs in my brain broke a little, as I asked how he planned to do that when he was literally strolling around with 4 supernatural beings and the party witnessed, in no particular order and among other things, the city of Turin nearly being exploded by an elemental beast. Legit Egyptian deities. A demigoddess from Victorian literature who was trying to murder them. He shrugged and, with a gotcha smile like this was incredibly convoluted multi-yeared plan, in which he played the entire world like chess pieces, said, "Oh, but that never actually happened. It's just that these guys are not smart enough to understand how reality works." He said that while pointing at the players, not their characters. I was pissed. Insulting my friend's intelligence for liking a thing that he doesn't was the last fucking straw. Me, no. Skeptic, what do you... Me, interrupting him. The rulebook and their character sheets say that their characters were able to do those things. The dice rolls say that they managed to do those things. The setting we're all playing in says that those magical things they met were real. And finally, I, the game master, say that it happened, and that your character is delusional for believing otherwise. I tried to be tolerant and all of our group paid the price, because you took it as permission to ruin the game for everyone. I will be blunt now. Your character will never reach his goal. In this game, magic is real, and any attempt to prove otherwise is like stating that the earth is flat. That was, apparently, a mistake. I saw him getting more aggravated with every word I spoke, but when I dared to put his character in the same category of anti-science conspiracy theorists, he exploded and ran away after trying to flip the table. Luckily for us, the table was sturdy oak, and Skeptic had the physical prowess of a chihuahua. I needed time to calm down, and we decided to pause the session to have some mindless fun like watching YouTube videos and whatnot. Unluckily for us, Skeptic was starting a positive shitstorm of slander, telling his mother how we singled him out, how we targeted him in every session, how we tried to force him to convert to Bastion's religion, and how we did all of that because we were envious of how smart he was compared to all of us. Of course, his mother reported this to the board of directors, and of course the board, not wanting to look like they were excluding someone, sided with him without even giving us a chance to tell our side of things. I got contacted by the board and, after literally 3 weeks of messages, I managed to convince them to give us a chance to explain how it actually went down. When we did, the board admitted that our version was the most likely to be true, because they knew Bastion was not a bigot, Guild was insanely diplomatic, and Shy was very non-confrontational, while Skeptic was known for playing the victim card whenever he didn't get everyone to admit that he was the best. That means the situation was solved, and that we were left alone while they had a stern discussion with him about behavior, right? Of course not! They downright stated that it did not matter if he lied, and if everything was entirely his fault, he perceived himself as the victim. Therefore, we needed to make amends and to compensate him by making our game more to his liking. People started protesting, but unknown to both my players and the board, a plan was forming in my mind. It was time to stop being nice to someone who was there with the specific purpose of ruining everything, and trying to make the rest of the association hate us the one time that we tried to defend ourselves. Not to brag, but I can be both incredibly creative and a grade A bastard. I gave my slimiest smile and asked for his exact and precise demands to be sure that I could give him a session just to his liking. Oh boy, was he glad to provide, thinking that he had finally gained the upper hand. Some of the rules that he submitted were: a player who is unsatisfied with a session should be rewarded for enduring it with objects of his choice. Of course, since he was unsatisfied with every session, he sent me an even longer list of things that I had to provide for him. That he deserved a solo session without the other characters, whose players nonetheless had to assist to see how smart people win the game. And in that said session, absolutely no supernatural element was allowed, even implied or that could be mistaken for magic. The other rules are not important. What is important is that I followed them to a T to craft the session. His arrogance made him fail to realize that he did not explicitly rule that I was supposed to give him anything that he wanted during the session. He was probably convinced that he was so smart, while I was so dumb, and that the rules that he posted would have meant he was going to be the undisputed lord of the session. I also had a card up my sleeve to bring the hammer down further, if necessary, and told the party beforehand what to do when everything inevitably went south. Also, we received permission from his mother to record the session to make sure that he wouldn't pull his stunt again. His mother, sure that Skeptic was going to get everything he wanted, allowed it. Basically, said session started with him driving a high-tech van in his quest to prove that magic was not real. He started growing frustrated when he noticed that no supernatural phenomenon were appearing for him to disprove. I pointed out that, according to his own rules, nothing that could be mistaken as magic could appear. Eventually, he found an alley with a vendor of clearly fake amulets and talismans, and went to harass him to feel superior. I handed him the victory on a silver plate, not even having him roll anything, and described how the vendor was humiliated and broken by his intellectual prowess. Once he returned to his van, he found it being broken into and robbed by some thugs. He started complaining, and I smiled. Me: "Well, your van is clearly filled to the brim with insanely valuable high-profile scientific equipment, things that would sell very well in the black market. Isn't it realistic that criminals would see the opportunity and seize it?" He decided to confront the thugs, just what I planned. As you might remember, he spent all of his points in scientific, non-combat-oriented equipment and in his intelligence. Meaning he was a scrawny, inexperienced man who was facing half a dozen hardened thugs, all armed with knives, brass knuckles, and metal clubs, and whose leader was basically the unholy spawn of Terry Silver from The Karate Kid 3, in his prime, and Andrew Tate, armed with an axe and a machete. Skeptic started complaining that it wasn't fair that these opponents were so much stronger than he was, and I simply answered that, according to his rules, there was nothing wrong, because it wasn't unrealistic for muggers to exist, or for people to be MMA experts, or for improvised weapons to be used by criminals. He desperately tried to outsmart the situation, but alas, you can't outsmart a 3,600 newtons punch to the front teeth. Skeptic turned to the other players and asked them to help. Basanzio: "You're in Detroit. You left us in Japan. How can we know what you're up to?" Skeptic: I try to use my communicator to reach them." Bastion: "I recall you actively refused to give us one of those to punish us for being irrational and stating that we would have no idea how to use it. Even if you did, there's no realistic way for us to reach across half the planet in time to save you. I mean, we could ask one of the NPCs to teleport us there, but that wouldn't be realistic because teleportation isn't real, right?" Skeptic, trying to appeal not to logic, but human decency: "Come on, this is a team game. We need to help each other." Guild: "That's rich, coming from the guy who actively refused to help us every single time we were in danger." Skeptic: "I didn't believe it was real. You need to respect my ideas." Guild: "And yet you never respected ours. But don't worry, you're not really in danger. My idea is that muggers don't exist, therefore your character is not being beaten to a bloody pulp." So, Skeptic's character got robbed of all his possessions, not only the ones he demanded from me as compensation, but everything that he had created, and all of his money and so on. He had to be hospitalized. It happens when you get severely beaten up and lose 2 limbs to a machete, and when their quest giver got the news, he visited him in the hospital. The quest giver downright stated that he could no longer take part in the missions because his body was completely compromised. Skeptic demanded a way to be salvaged, but I gave him my nastiest, most condescending smile. Me: "Unfortunately, prosthetic limbs advanced enough for your situation don't exist in the real world. Therefore your character having them would not be realistic. You will need to spend months just to be able to breathe without coughing blood, and more months to teach your remaining limbs how to function again. Even then, you would still lack an arm and a leg." Skeptic: But Shy one time was nearly destroyed and he got better. Why can he and I can't?" Me: "Well, because what healed him so fast was his vampiric magic, and magic, of course, doesn't exist in this session, right?" Then, to rub not even salt, but high-concentration sulfuric acid in his wounds, I turned to the rest of the party and asked them if they were satisfied with the session. They, of course, not having been allowed to play, were not. So they, by Skeptic's own rules, received a nice amount of powerful magic items. We prepared them in advance to be as unrealistic and over the top as possible, just to piss Skeptic off. Petty? Absolutely. Do we all think he deserved it? You have no idea. We had the rules so stacked against us by the board of directors, and it was clear that whenever he didn't get his way, we would be punished for not spreading our metaphorical ass cheeks, and due to him knowing that, it was impossible to reach him halfway through, because nothing short of us thanking him for ruining the game would have appeased him. And if he were to get that, it would simply confirm to him that he gets to do whatever he wants because he's oh so much better. He went off about how we had the duty to appease him, about how we are a bunch of slur for people with Down syndrome for disagreeing with him, about how he had an IQ of 118, and therefore he could do as he pleased, and we all had to obey him. I grinned more. Precisely what I was hoping for. Once he stopped to breathe, I pulled a thing from my bag, my aforementioned card from my sleeve. See, I too got tested for IQ when I was young, and my parents were still trying to understand what my condition was. I show him a copy of the papers with all the official marks and signs and whatnot. I point out the number, a nice big fat 142. I genuinely saw his brain shatter like Bohemian crystal. He knew that if he tried to pretend that my document was fake, anyone could accuse his IQ document of being fake, taking away from him his most important bragging element. On the other hand, admitting that the document was legit would mean admitting his intelligence number wasn't the highest in the room. He positively shrieked that he was going to destroy us, that he was going to make an example of us, that he was going to have us booted from the association, and that we had made ourselves a dangerous and smart enemy. Guild, yes, so smart that he confessed his entire plan in front of a camera. I could see Skeptic evaluating his chances of stealing the camera and running away, and understanding that, being it on the other side of the room, he would have to go through Bastion and Guild, who were the two most physically fit members of the group. He ran away, and his mother came into the room to demand us to destroy the record because it was causing emotional turmoil to her son. When we pointed out that he was only angry because he couldn't lie and blame his own shortcomings on everyone else as usual, she tried to say that she was taking back her permission to record her son, a thing with a negative amount of legal power. She resorted to begging us to giving him another chance. After all, we proved our point, and making him upset about a game was cruel, right? I, as the DM, tried to be diplomatic. Me, ma'am, can you be sure that he won't pull any other stunts like the ones he pulled every single session? Or that whenever we don't change the game to make him feel superior, he won't try to ruin our reputation? Can we record every session to make sure that we have evidence of his lies if he tries it again? She couldn't answer that, and so Skeptic's time with the association came to an end. No big fight, no meltdown, no legal fallouts, nothing. So this was my very first horror story. I hope that you enjoyed it, and that my group didn't seem too nasty. We're usually very amicable, but we were forced into a situation where someone was being actively disruptive and offensive to punish us for liking fantasy, and rules where we were specifically made to stop us from getting help. TLDR. Anti-fantasy player joins fantasy-themed RP, specifically to belittle other players for liking it, throws tantrums whenever his superior intellect doesn't get him everything he wants, gets outsmarted because he is not nearly as clever as he demands to be considered. Edit. Some people decided that this story was false. While some arguments are illogical, because apparently me being smart is somehow implausible, one deserves to be addressed, specifically the counter-argument that the story might be fake because I depict myself as some sort of Machiavellian mastermind who managed to ensure that Skeptic fell in my trap completely. Rest assured I am not. I am in fact fairly gullible and naive, and the only reason that I managed to trick Skeptic was because he thought himself smarter than he was, to the point that he firmly believed his plan was infallible just by virtue of being his, and therefore none of us dummies could turn it against him. It's not that hard to trick someone when he's blinded by his own arrogance, and therefore he doesn't even entertain the notion that he might be tricked, thus walking straight into the trap. On a nicer note, despite enduring Skeptic and how that soured the campaign for all of us, I took some time to revamp it and change it a bit to keep it fresh and surprising, and I will soon try to bring it up again to my players. Also, for those who wondered and I didn't manage to answer, yes, the campaign was set in the Nasuverse. Thank you all for the comments and the karma. You're a wonderful audience, and I will try to tell you more stuff soon. Quite the long horror story. I'll try to keep my own thoughts a bit shorter, but there's a lot to unpack here. So, with the association, I think that their creation and existence is a good thing in general, that it helps provide a safe space for people on the spectrum and people who might need it, who want to enjoy social activities like playing tabletop role-playing. Now, the rule of never being able to kick someone out and having to always allow them in just does not seem like a good rule at all. And as the OP said, them having to fight for 3 weeks with the association to even be listened to have their side of the story told is honestly just horrendous on the association's part. If you're going to be hosting these sorts of gatherings or this group almost, then you should be able to listen to all parties associated with a story like that, especially since they know that Skeptic has been a problem in the past, and yet they still choose to believe him and say that because he perceives himself to be the victim, then he is, which is insane reasoning in any real-life form. But we won't get too much into that because that's just crazy. The other thing with Skeptic, though, he definitely wanted to just join their fantasy game just to ruin it for them, and I think that he probably got a lot of enjoyment out of fucking with them, essentially, and like OP again stated, feeling like he was so much more superior and intellectually smart than them, and that he could just do whatever he wanted and fuck up their game and belittle them all for believing in things that he doesn't, which complete bigot in the making if I've ever heard one. It is very nice, though, that the OP managed to trick him and basically cause his own downfall. I think it's funny that the mother also agreed to the recording and basically said, sure, you can record this, I'm sure that my son will be fine, when she sounds very much like the type who believes that her child can do no wrong. Which I'm not a parent myself, but I don't feel is a very good trait to have in general. So, it was nice to see Skeptic's downfall by the hands of himself, essentially. He walked into his own trap because he couldn't handle not being the smartest in the room and couldn't handle admitting when he was wrong. So let that be a lesson, I suppose, in humility and understanding when maybe a group or a game isn't quite the fit for you, and that you shouldn't be trying to ruin someone else's time when they're having fun just because you're not having fun. And that will do it for our RPG horror stories. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for joining me, as always. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.